This episode of the podcast is brought to you by 88 Frames Media. From website development, podcast creation and editing, videography, and more, 88 Frames Media has you covered. Visit 88 Frames Media for more information. That's 88framesmedia.com. Would you say it says you can leave?
Well, not anymore. It did before.
Oh, not anymore. All right. Don't leave me, Chris. If you leave me now, you take away the biggest part of me.
Well, just for our listeners' sake, I know I've told you this before, but every time we're texting, Marissa will walk by and be like, "So, how's your girlfriend?" He's fine, thank you. Thank you for asking.
He's doing great.
He's the light of my life.
Ooh, no, baby, please don't go. All right, you ready?
Let's do it.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to episode 2 of the Sanctum Sanctorum podcast. I am one half of your host, Joey.
And I just had balloons go on my screen, which means you're excited to see me.
Is it if I shout, the balloons show up?
I don't know. You know, I think it's because I did this. No? Yeah.
I don't
know why
that.
That's so weird. Anyway, I'm Chris, and as you can see, it's a celebration.
Let's just do that randomly throughout the episode.
It's a celebration for me to be here, clearly.
I love it. Well, Sanctum Sanctorum podcast, where comics and Christ culture collide. We take balloons, clearly, and comics, and we find spiritual content within them. I'm excited for episode 2, where we are covering Werewolf by Night. Chris, were you familiar with Werewolf by Night before the special presentation came out?
So I was aware of I've read some Werewolf by Night. I don't actually own any, but I have read Werewolf by Night before. I've read them as part of Mrs. Deadpool's Howling Commandos, which was a miniseries a few years back, and Frankenstein Agent of Shade, which is DC. So no, different werewolf. But in Deadpool's Howling Commandos, I did read Werewolf by Night. But I wasn't huge on the lore. I knew more about Elsa Bloodstone than I did the werewolf himself.
Sure. Yeah, I was fairly unfamiliar, but I think it's a phenomenal take, particularly for our Halloween season. And we're going to dive into that and more, our good stuff, our bad stuff, our spiritual stuff. But before we get into that, I want to talk about a comic culture moment. I was a couple minutes into watching Werewolf by Night, and I'm like, I'm really digging this. This is really good. I'm really enjoying it. I love the way it's being done. I really loved everything about it. And not to give away my leanings, but I felt like this sense of loss, like, man, I really would have liked to experience this in the theater. And then I remembered, wait a second, when did this come out? Well, it came out mid-COVID. It came out in 2022, which got me thinking, the world has radically changed, and so is the way that we consume content, particular cultural content, media. Streaming services and direct-to-digital movies are now the norm. And so I had to ask this question, which I posed to you and I want to pose to our audience. The effects of the events of 2020, they have had impact on our culture and the way that we consume content. Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? But more pervasive, does that affect the way that we experience the content? Does it affect whether we like it or not based on whether or not we can just stream it? What are some of your thoughts, Chris?
Well, to answer your last question first, I don't think that it affects the way I like something, because for me, my enjoyment of something isn't necessarily based on whether I see it at home or out in the theater or by myself or with other people for the most part. But going to the movie theater used to be an experience. You would go opening night to see the latest. You know, usually it was comic book movies or a big blockbuster. You go opening night, there are people dressed up. You wear the hat and the T-shirt of whatever you're going to see, and it was always this really cool thing. But you know,
Yeah,
COVID
totally.
especially kind of stopped that from happening. Especially with big movies, they wanted to release them either simultaneously on streaming and in theaters, or directly to streaming, because I think for them they just wanted people to watch it more than experience it, if that makes sense.
Do you think that money had anything to do with it? And I hate to be the cynical guy of just like, oh, it's all about money, but I have to wonder if it plays into it. Like they're spending these massive budgets and they're pouring all these time, energy, and resources into these projects, and they're not going to get the immediate gratification and return on that because of a thing like an opening weekend. Do you think that it's just like, hey, we got to get our money back as soon as possible?
I mean, it could be, but I feel like they would be making less. I mean, obviously, you know, like these streaming services pay the companies the rights to stream the movie, and I'm sure a portion of all the people who subscribe to them go to the, you know, go to the film companies and all that
Sure.
as well. But I can't imagine they're making the same kind of return that they would in an opening weekend or an opening week or month or whatever it is that they do. Because you know, if you think about it, if I'm the only person paying for Disney Plus out of a group of 8 people, and I have those other 7 people come over my house and we all watch the one movie that's being released together, that's eight. You know, that's 8 payments that you're not getting at the movies. You're getting only one payment, and you're not getting those on the service because mine is the only one streaming it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it was just an interesting thought for me. Like I think I would have enjoyed certain movies more had I been in the theater. And it wasn't necessarily like, oh, the quality is bad. It's more like I think I've lost something in the experience
Yeah,
of cinema,
yeah. That was my point.
of the subwoofer underneath my seat. And yeah, I mean, like the size of the screen actually does make a difference. And I used to think like it doesn't matter, I just want the content. No, actually I want the experience.
Yeah, for some things, definitely the experience was lost um a bit, and I think especially with comic book movies, you felt that, and you know, there was a huge controversy over Black Widow when that came out because it was released simultaneously
Right.
on Disney Plus and in the theaters. And you know, there were issues with Scarlett Johansson not getting the same kind of return financially that she would have otherwise. But I think, you know, they released Zack Snyder's Justice League on streaming, which on screaming, jeez, on streaming, and that was a
Oh,
big.
it was screaming.
It was, I was streaming in excitement, to be honest, but it was, you know, this huge event that was coming out, and as maybe tiring as it would have been to sit in a theater for 4 hours, I feel like seeing that on the big screen or in IMAX would have been such an event. Um, of
Yeah.
seeing this passion played out, of seeing this iconic idea because of how it came about, you know, in theaters would have been really cool. And as much as I loved seeing it at all, you know, watching it from my couch on my TV where I kept having to pause it to go get a snack or go use the bathroom or go because the dog was barking or whatever, it wasn't the same experience. It didn't stop me from enjoying the content, like you said, but the experience definitely wasn't as fantastical as it could have been.
And I think it also highlighted some of the strengths and weaknesses of the project in and of itself. And I'll give you 2 examples that came to mind. One, it couldn't cover bad quality. I feel like an experience like buying a ticket and going to the theater, getting some popcorn and seeing things on a huge screen would have helped something like Wonder Woman 84,
Mm-hmm.
which we're going to talk about in the next upcoming months. But I feel like because it was just at your house, it couldn't hide behind any pretense. It was just not a great film. Whereas because you were watching it episodically week after week, something like WandaVision worked so well because it was TV focused and because it was at home and because it felt like the thing it was trying to emulate. And that's where that really highlighted the beauty of, like, I think that's one of the reasons I absolutely adore WandaVision.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll talk about that on this show as well. But I think because we were at home and because it was made to feel like TV, whether they tried to do that with the timing of everything or not, it was like a cosmic event that just made the quality and the subject matter and even the cinematography just amplified at a whole new level for me. And if you're wondering how I feel about WandaVision, there it is.
It seems you liked it.
I think I did. But it seems as though the environment does play a role in a lot of these content.
Mm-hmm. I really think that's true, especially when you have these movies big with big effects attached to them. You know, recently I watched I watched at home because I don't go to the movies much anymore. Kind of, you know, partly the cost and partly the habit from COVID of not going. But
It is so
I
expensive.
watched the new Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. I watched that at home. Godzilla and Kong, the new Empire. I watched that at home. The last few movies of the MCU and the DCEU, all of those I watched at home. And while I
Yep.
enjoyed getting to see them at home, and I enjoyed watching them because it's all things that I love, it just wasn't the same. And I had a hard time wondering if, like, man, Godzilla and Kong fighting would have been really cool, in Ultra Vision, or
Right.
seeing Aquaman 2 in IMAX would have been really cool, all the ocean scenes and all that stuff. And
Would it have
might have, well, the watching the effects of some of this stuff, because to me
effects? Sure.
part of the experience is also seeing the effects. Like, think about a disaster movie, when you see the giant tidal wave about to destroy the city, or you see the asteroid heading to Earth.
On your 14-inch screen.
Right, seeing it, watching that on my phone or on my small TV, 15 feet away in my living room, is not the same as, like, man, this makes me feel like I'm about to get hit by the tidal wave. And I feel like
Right.
that's the same with a lot of the superhero movies too, and a lot of sci-fi and fantasy. They're these big epic stories with these huge epic effects, and it just feels like, man, I want to feel like I'm in the room where it happens, you know what I mean? Like, I want to feel like I'm in the ocean with them. I want to feel like I'm in space with them. I want to feel like I'm part of the fight or whatever. And that's not the same. So as much as I appreciate what streaming has done with giving the ability to watch all these movies from the comfort of home, and not have to pay tons and tons of money to go see them one time, it I mean, you miss something. You miss
Yeah.
the experience of it. And I think, like you were saying, that it's not even about it being a good movie or a bad movie. Experiencing it kind of prevents you from seeing if it's good or bad in some of those big movies, because you're just experiencing it. Then you could watch it later with a more critical eye, but seeing it happen is something special. And I think that
Yeah.
COVID kind of took that away from that.
Yeah. The way that it was intended. Did you quote Hamilton just before?
I sure did. I
Well
sure
done.
did, because I don't live under a rock and I have a heart and soul. So Hamilton is a regular part of my vernacular.
One of the greatest Broadway shows, I think, ever.
I mean, honestly, people will say that it's overhyped and that, everybody likes it just because everybody else likes it. There's a
It's not.
reason that everybody likes it.
There's a reason. And there's a reason that this film Werewolf by Night is our episode 2. This came out in 2022. It is a horror action flick. Who directed this?
This was directed, now I cannot remember his name offhand, and I forgot to write it down, but what I do know is that this was his directorial debut, and before that, he was a composer. So he'd also did the music for this.
No.
Yeah. So he was only a
We should
composer.
honor that individual by looking up their name.
Absolutely. Absolutely. If you got that covered, I
Michael
can.
Giacchino.
Giacchino, that was it. Yeah. But he, I mean, for his first foray into directing, the music alone I thought was really good. But for being your first outing as a director, um well done, sir.
Well done indeed.
But it also stars Gael Garcia Bernal, who plays Jack Russell, and then Laura Donnelly, who plays Elsa Bloodstone, were our two main stars of this little project. Now, before we get into the good, because I don't know if this is
Do
necessarily,
you want me to give the plot synopsis?
I do want you to give the plot synopsis, and then I have a question for you.
All right. Cue the foreboding music. Here we go. On a night so dark and gloomy, it makes My Chemical Romance look like My Little Pony. A super secret club of monster hunters. Think the Avengers, but more garlic and less spandex. Sneak out of the shadows and gather at a super creepy bloodstone temple. Everyone's wearing black, because apparently that's the dress code for sneaky, sinister, and brooding. But you probably won't be able to tell because,
The movie's also in black and white, so
much like our episode right now, we're all in black and white. Their fearless leader has recently taken an unexpected vacation to the afterlife. And now, the team is here for a memorial that's about as cheerful as a trip to the dentist. But instead of paying respects and sharing fond memories, they're thrown into a deadly game of Capture the Flag, Bloodstone Edition. One member must obtain the powerful monster-killing weapon, the Bloodstone. Through this nightmarish version of The Amazing Race and The Maze Runner, the hunters end up facing off against a monster so terrifying, it makes Michael Myers look like Kirk Cameron. Get ready to howl in excitement for this Marvel Studios special presentation, Werewolf by Night. Dun, dun, dun!
wow, I gotta say, that was more detailed than I thought it was gonna be. That was something. Michael Myers looks like Kirk Cameron.
Here to entertain, my friend.
That was, I gotta say, I'm very impressed. That's gonna be a hard one to top for future installments, I think.
All right, let's put some color back into this episode. There we go.
Amazing.
Amazing. There are so many good things about this Marvel special presentation.
So many, and I gotta say, I like that it was called Marvel Special Presentation. But before we get into the good, I don't know if this was part of your good or your bad or anything like that, but what did you think of the length um, of this special? It clocked in at about 49 minutes. How did you feel about that before we dive in? Unless that's in your bad stuff.
No, it's not even in. It's not in good and it's not in bad. It was fine. I could have dealt with a little bit more because I was really enjoying the world and the environment.
Yeah.
And then at the same time, I'm sort of like, well, am I just a greedy pig? Do I just want more because I want more, or is this perfect? And so I didn't even write it down. I was aware of it, that it was sort of shorter than usual, but I don't know if it's good or bad. What did you think?
I actually had it in my good because
Okay.
to me, this is the standard bearer for what all of the Marvel Disney Plus projects should have been. Now, I understand something like Hawkeye or the Falcon and the Winter Soldier because those were already established characters. So giving them an 8 episode series was a little more understandable. Same with WandaVision. These were already characters we were familiar with. This was just
Sure.
personal story for them. But I think something like Miss Marvel, She-Hulk, Werewolf by Night, Moon Knight, all of these characters, the results were so mixed and sometimes so long that I feel like all of them could have stood for an hour special, an introduction to this character, this world, and then, that little tag that says so and so will return. Great. Now I can watch them in future movies and they'll be,
Sure.
I know who they are. I know what their power is. I get an idea of what their world and who their connections are. And now I can just wait for the future to see them. I didn't need, I think especially She-Hulk would have been served better by that. So I think
She-Hulk would have been best if they didn't do it.
well, yeah, but wouldn't you have been more willing to sit through a 45-minute special of She-Hulk rather than
Yeah,
8 or 10 episodes of it?
absolutely.
Because then it would be like, I know who it is. Now I can go into the next Hulk movie or Avenger movie or whatever where she comes in and not be blindsided, but I don't have to commit this amount of time to something that wasn't very good. So I think the
Yeah.
time should be the standard by which they do all the Marvel TV shows from now on. To be
I
to
like
be
it.
honest, I thought it was great.
The black and white is phenomenal.
Hmm.
There is a color version on Disney Plus. I would recommend not even touching it.
Don't
I have
bother
seen it. It's fine, but this is best served in its original black and white.
with just the Bloodstone as red,
Yep, I have
which
that as well.
and that's a little ode to comics. They've been doing these lines of Harley Quinn black, white, and red, Deadpool black, white, and red, Wolverine black, white, and red. And it's such a cool artistic style to just have that be the only thing of color. Very cool.
Yep. The I mean, even the opening, the slasher claws going through the title, that was genius.
Hmm.
And the entire thing is a nostalgia Universal Monster tribute.
Hmm.
It's so. I mean, yes, it is the world of werewolves, but it's still they did it so well in a way that's not campy, but it almost is like, well, wait, is this Universal or is this Marvel?
Hmm. I loved every bit of that, even the popping and the crackling that made it
Yep.
look like it was filmed on 88 millimeter and put on real film instead of digital.
There's one scene in particular where this works so well, which is when after Jack gets spoiler alert after Jack gets taken and they're put inside the cage and he's coming to, and it goes from blurry to clear. It feels so 1931.
Hmm.
Like everything about it, the grit, the jitter, even the grain that's on there. I mean, it's flawless. I wish the entire movie was filmed with that. It's a little too clean for me if you wanted to set it, but maybe that's not like, oh, it's just a straight rip off. So like I'll give it that. But that scene in particular, I was like, wow, this one's like dead on.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
There was a right amount of gore and horror with this. This is sort of Marvel's first foray into this realm of like the supernatural. Like obviously we've had Blade before and Multiverse of Madness is a disaster, but we've never really gotten into the horror aspect of things, and I felt like to get into this was the great first step where it wasn't too bad, but like a hand gets chopped off. Like we are in the world, right?
Sorry, go ahead.
I mean, I can't stop talking about all the great stuff. I absolutely adore the transformation of Jack into the werewolf as seen through the shadows on the wall
Behind Elsa in the cage. Yep.
and on her face. Oh my goodness, what a great stylistic choice for a first-time director.
Exactly, and that was another ode to the Universal Monster Pictures where they didn't have the technology to do crazy special effects, and so to do
Yeah.
some of that stuff in shadow not only allows them to stay on budget, but I think also for the audience it allows us to kind of imagine what is going on, like what Elsa is seeing we're basing it on the look on her face and the shadow behind her, but like our imagination is probably making it so much more terrifying than he made it in real life. Because you know we've
Exactly.
watched the Hulk transform into a creature, we've watched Abomination transform into a creature, and I think somebody turning into a werewolf could have been very cheesy looking, but that choice, amazing, amazing.
It was great. Another thing I really liked, and I'd like your thoughts on this. I love that we walked into pre-existing relationships.
Hmm.
It's a good bad thing for me where we didn't get a lot of backstory and connection. We just sort of find ourselves where these characters are, and we have to get caught up to speed where their relationships and their stories find us, instead of like, all right, give me 20 minutes of backstory about this character and their motivations. Like even the final scene where this worked really well was Ted and Jack just like, being friends.
Yeah, just having coffee and complaining at each other, blaming each other a little bit. Yeah, that was
It
great.
was comfortable. It was like putting on an old sweater where it just felt right, and it was so warm. And to get that out of a horror movie was very interesting.
Yeah, and I don't know if you felt this way too, but I definitely got kind of like a Rocket and Groot vibe, a Han Solo and
Yeah,
Chewbacca vibe. Like these guys are different, but the best of friends, and they have this brotherhood that we don't see,
and they
and
understand each
you
other.
just know. Like I've felt that way, from the very first Star Wars movie. That like I don't need the entire history of how Han and Chewie met. I can just tell that they would do anything for each other, and they're found family. And that's how I feel like you were with Jack
Yep.
and Ted. It was like these guys just get each other. They know each other. There's a bond there. I don't need that they grew up together or they have a blood oath to each other or whatever. I just love that. Oh, they're friends. Great. Okay, carry on.
And it wasn't forced.
No, it was so easy and natural, and it wasn't silly either. It would have been very easy to take a giant plant monster and a werewolf and be like, okay, this is like a little giving. It's a little Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein. There was just the right amount of humor and understanding with Ted's reactions too. Was great. I yeah, I can't say enough good things. You kind of took all of my stuff.
I got one more, which is just the shift to color at the end is perfect for me while Wizard of Oz music plays. I mean, come on.
That was and again another ode to an very old and classic movie. Like this guy clearly loves his film history and clearly loves the great grandfathers of great movies. He
Yep.
clearly has that ingrained in him from his directing choices, his stylistic choices. I think you mentioned this, but the design of Jack when he's in werewolf form, perfect for me. I
Agreed.
don't really like werewolf stuff generally. And I think that the design of this was one, he looked like the comic book character, but it would have been so easy to make him just a giant wolf. That's what it was in, Twilight. That's what it is in that show, Wolf Like Me, that show that's on Peacock. When they transform, they're just a giant dog. And I like that
Mm.
he walked on two legs. He didn't have a snout. He just had that kind of deformed face, but he didn't look like, oh, this is just a big wolf. I thought there was a realism to it.
He had 1930s makeup.
Yeah, well, he looked like the Wolfman, a little toned down, but looked like the Wolfman, which was great. And the only other thing I have is I loved that this was a deep character pull kind of thing, kind of like when they did
True.
Guardians. This was like, your average person is not going to know Werewolf by Night, is not going to know Elsa Bloodstone, is not going to know Man Thing. And I really thought it was fun to see these characters on screen and to see how many people appreciated it. And for me, it's a yearly Halloween watch. Like I'll do this every year as part of my Halloween media rotation.
I'll probably watch it again after this.
I kind of might. I mean, I could even just put it on in the background and just enjoy it.
It would be great.
But yeah,
I want to get into some bad stuff, but we've got a word from our sponsor, so stick around.
today's episode is brought to you by Bell Rev Medical University. Do you want to be a doctor, but the do no harm gets you down? Are you worried that your capacity for evil will ostracize you amongst your peers? Have you always wondered if there was a place for you? Wonder no more. At Bell Rev Medical University, you can graduate with a PhD in evil. Student loans? Not here. Our staff highly encourage muggings, robberies, and bank heists for all your financial needs. We have a highly educated staff ready to train the next generation of professionals such as Dr. Hugo Strange, Dr. Otto Octavius, Dr. Harleen Quinzel, and Dr. Victor Von Doom. They, along with the rest of our esteemed staff, are excited to set you loose into the chaotic world of villainy. Apply today, or else.
Set you loose. Well done, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's good. Set you loose. We're back. Thank you for that sponsorship. What is it? Not Bell Labs.
Bell Rev Medical University.
That's great. Yeah, we appreciate it. And as always, that's not a real product. So there's a couple things that I have issue with, even though I just ranted how great this film is. Do you have any bad? Because I've got 3 things. 2 of them sort of don't count, and 1 is major for me.
Okay, so I have in my notes, I have 4 things, but 2 of them have to do. Actually, I'm sorry. Only one of them has to do with kind of with the is not the movie's fault. It's the fault of the comic book.
Okay.
The other 3 things are the fault of Disney and Marvel Studios, and really don't have anything to do with the quality of the movie. So
Sure.
not really anything bad about the movie.
All right. What do you got?
All right, so the comic book issue I have is the early Marvel creators in the 60s and 70s seemed to always want to make names into puns. Werewolf by Night is about a man who turns into a werewolf. It's about half man, half dog, and his name is Jack Russell.
I hate it.
That's come on. I mean that's similar to Otto Octavius. Like you got the Oct in there for Dr. Octopus. Harleen Quinzel becomes Harley Quinn. It's like, some of these early name choices are like, come on. Like naming Man Thing Ted. That's great.
It's funny.
His name is Ted. But then you have Elsa Bloodstone, who, lived at Bloodstone Manor, and they were fighting for the Bloodstone because of the power of the Bloodstone. It's okay.
Just got lazy
all
there.
right. We need to tweak these names just a little bit. Now, I don't want them changed from comic to movie because
No.
I want the familiarity, but I think that when they were created, you should have done another pass at some of those name choices.
I'll agree with that.
My other issues is I worry that as fun as this was, as really cool as Elsa and Ted and Jack were as characters and as creatures, we're not going to see them again.
I agree with that.
It would have been really cool to set up something like the supernatural version of the Howling Commandos or the Midnight Suns, which Elsa was a part of in the comics. And that, that also includes Ghost Rider, who we've seen in Agents of Shield in the MCU. It includes Blade, who's
Right.
supposed to be making a debut soon. So it's possible to do it, but I don't think they're ever gonna do either of those. And there was no reference to any of the other supernatural characters, which would have been fun, like a Blade or a Mephisto or something like that. I think could have been fun.
Although, if you're up to speed on your Agatha,
Right. Yeah. So yeah, Agatha. No reference to the fact that witchcraft is real or any of this stuff. It even would have been fun to even have a reference to like Craven the Hunter. I could see him hunting monsters as part of the
sure.
ultimate hunts. So for me, that was like that was kind of a missed opportunity, but that's not the fault of the movie. That's Marvel Studios not wanting to, I guess, dip their toe too deep into these uncharted waters. So I get it, but it was like that would have been fun. But other than that, I don't have anything bad. And again, this wasn't even none of this was the fault of the movie. It was the fault of the old creators and the studio heads. That's their problem to deal with.
I'll agree with all of them. Here's my 3 issues.
Are you saving the big one for last?
Of
All
course,
right.
got to build to something here. The first one, the jump scares were way too predictable for me. It paused way too much, and I called it every single time.
Mm,
It's like, and maybe that's because this is the MCU version of horror,
right.
and so it sort of needs to set you up without, having you mess your pants. But to me, like, there were times where I was like, oh, the music is gone. I wonder what will happen.
I mean, I
All right.
I get
Not
that
a,
didn't bother me because I've consumed so much horror that jump scares don't bother me anyway. But I can see how
yeah,
the average consumer would be like, yeah.
I would have appreciated a little loss of breath.
But they also want to make it palatable for everybody.
Right. They have to, appeal to the wider audience. The second thing, we talked about how our characters were very familiar and we didn't get a ton of backstory and all of that. That was a double-edged sword for me because at times it made character connection a little hard for me, particularly things with the deaths and the motivations and even the victories at times. They seemed a little stakeless, pun intended. It just, I think I would have needed a little bit more character development for the consumer who has no idea who any of these people are. It was a little bit like I could see how you could get lost.
Character development for like the other hunters.
I think so, yeah, because it wasn't like we were getting the Warriors 3. I felt like even watching Thor, you sort of got the camaraderie that came with those characters, but like you understood them to the level you needed to, and I felt like the other hunters were just there to get killed off.
Well, that's. I mean, I think that's why they didn't use named, big named characters because they were really just red shirts. They were
Yeah,
there because the other hunters needed something to kill that wasn't the monster, and Jack needed people to kill. So that's why I think that I don't agree with that only because I feel like that was their purpose. That's why none of them were well known hunters from Marvel Comics or from horror lore or anything like that.
sure. And you said red shirts. For our audience who has no idea what that means, what do you mean when you say red shirts?
Well, if you're familiar with especially the original series of Star Trek, oftentimes if part of the
That
landing
often exclusively.
exclusively part of the landing party often included low-level officers who were wearing red Starfleet uniforms. They were often killed by an explosion, killed by the monster or the alien, or taken captive, and they became known in geek culture as if you're a red shirt, it just means you're there to die, you're there to be fodder, you're there to serve no purpose but possible motivation. Um, for our heroes. It's kind of like the lady in the fridge trope, where you're really just there to serve as motivation for the main hero. So
Exactly.
that's what these other hunters kind of were. So that's why it didn't bother me. I didn't need to know who they were. I knew they weren't going to make it, and even if they did, you weren't going to see them again. So
True. All right. Ready for my massive issue with this entire project?
all right, now I just want to, as a disclaimer, Joey told me he had a huge issue with the movie. Wouldn't tell me what it was because he wanted my genuine reaction. So I'm ready to be annoyed. Although, yeah, maybe it'll surprise you, but I'm ready to be annoyed.
Drum roll, please. My big issue is the CGI. The CGI in this project is not bad. It is phenomenal. Classic Marvel. They've got it down to a T. But it was so noticeable when contrasted with everything else they were doing. And I wish that they relied more on practical effects, particularly for Man-Thing. I feel like if they went practical, particularly with that character, but also with some of the other things they did, it wouldn't have been so jarring every time I saw a special effect.
Okay.
Ooh.
I understand. I understand what you're saying, and I'm a big practical effect guy. You know,
That's why I saved
The
this, by the way.
the Jim Henson Company, very close to my heart. So
Yeah.
I'm all about the practical effects. I don't think that they could have done what they did with practical effects, though. I think they
Probably
tried to do
not.
a lot with the wolf and with Man Thing that it would have been maybe blending them a little bit, but I think it would have been too hard to accomplish some of the big stuff. Now I don't think it looked as bad as some of Marvel's more recent projects, and I think the black and white helped that, to be
Sure.
honest. I think if you watch now I haven't watched the color one. I refuse to do it. And I feel like it's going to look worse in the color.
It actually, the special effects work better in color for me, but because it feels so classic Universal monster horror, it's so out of place where, like, I was in the world, I was with you, we were hitting on all cylinders, and as soon as I saw, like, a special effect, and then particularly when Man-Thing showed up and those eyes are just so clearly digital, I was like, we were so close to a flawless project. And I get it. It's probably way more expensive to actually build all this stuff, and it was a short thing. They wanted to just do it to do it. And, passion project. It's the middle of COVID. Hey, let's just do this. We've got an entire team of digital artists who can knock this stuff out really quickly. But to me, it lost the integrity of the project.
Yeah, I can't say I agree that it was that big a deal for me. Practical effects would have been cool and also would have been very of the time, but I think there was enough makeup and enough practicality that it didn't bother me, and I think this kind of project needed the digital thing because of the creatures they were working with to make it look not ridiculous.
I think you need to be bothered more.
Well, I think that you're stupid.
Okay. Why don't we go to spiritual stuff? Because there's some really cool spiritual things in here, but the one that jumped out to me is a line that Jack says. He goes, "That's a part of me that's not me." The parts of ourselves that often hurt other people are the parts that we can't control at times, the parts that we wish we didn't have. It's that internal struggle thing, which werewolves just canonically do a really good job of, like, I can't control this. I wish I could. It's inside, but
That's that inner beast, and
it really is. And Romans 7 has this dialogue with the Apostle Paul where he's talking about, the thing that I want to do, I don't do, and the thing that I do, I don't want to do. And there's this struggle with sin, and it's never it's never that we're going to be free from it.
Hmm.
This side of heaven, at least, we're always going to have it because it's a part of our nature. But at the very end of that passage, Paul says, "But thanks be to God who delivers us through Jesus." I think, yes, there's the big deliverance of from hell, however we define that, into the presence of God. But I think there's also just deliverance from ourselves, that we don't have to be limited and defeated, that we struggle with this stuff, that there is victory in Christ. And because of his death on the cross, we now have access to that victory. But it was a really interesting look to sort of see the war going on in an individual and see that sort of manifest instead of just a purely mental exercise.
Now, alongside of that, I understand what you're saying, but do you think it would be better to, we'll take Jack Russell, for our example. Do you think it would be better, rather than telling Elsa, there's a part of me that's not me and I have no control over it? Wouldn't it be better for him to say, this monster inside of me is part of me, and I accept it, and I know I wish that I could do something about it. I just have to fight it every day. And I have to look that demon in the eye and say, you don't control me, I control you. Wouldn't
Yeah,
wouldn't that
I
be
mean, that's
better,
an
rather
interesting.
rather than saying I have no control over it? I feel like saying, through the power of Jesus, I do have control over it. It's a part of me. It's the part of me I wish wasn't there, but it's still a part of who I am. I just have to fight it every day.
Yeah, and I think not in a defeatist way, like, well, this is just the way I am. Can't really do anything but fight it. But in an authoritative, who we are in Christ,
Yeah,
we have the ability to do that. And so, yes, we, there's sort of an acceptance, like, we have a sinful nature. Let's not pretend like we don't.
right.
Because of that and that acceptance, now we can actually address the problem. The first step in addressing any problem is admitting that you have one.
Right. So I think that's the difference, is acknowledging, not accepting, but acknowledging,
That's it.
and knowing that I recognize this. It sucks and I don't want it, but
For him to even have that dialogue and to share that with her is sort of a look at the journey he's had in acceptance.
yeah.
Like, I've come to the point where now I can at least talk about this. How many Christians do you know even talk about their struggles? Right? So, like, getting to the point of acknowledging that we have a sin issue, and not just like, well, the pastor talks about it and I'll try not to curse so much this week, but like, nope, this is who I am because of my sin nature.
Right.
That being the case, this is now how I deal with that. And I would have loved if he like talked about, some of the ways that he's wrestled with some of this, but ultimately, like, every 30 days when the moon comes out, this is what it's going to be. But yeah, it was just a really interesting thought of like, yeah, this is the physical manifestation in an MCU horror film, but I have my own version of this.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really great point. My what I kind of took from this spiritually kind of goes hand in hand with what you were saying. For me, it's about what your is who you are. Does who you are prevent what your calling is? If you look at the people that God chose to do the greatest things through, you had Rahab and Mary Magdalene, who were prostitutes. You had Peter, who had major anger issues. He had no control over his emotional state. Matthew was a tax collector. Judas, we all know what Judas did, and Jesus still called him among, counted him among his 12 closest friends, journeyed with him,
Yeah.
lived with him, ate with him. These people in the show, in the movie rather, hunt monsters, and they see nothing but monsters. And for some of them, that might be all they are. But for Ted, for Man Thing, there's a soul in there. There's good in there. Same with Jack. He may have this creature inside him, but we see at the end that he was able to recognize the good in Elsa and didn't kill her. He was able to rescue his friend and not, have monster versus monster. So I think that his calling of being good, doing good despite this curse supersedes the curse. And
Yeah.
I think that that's important for us as followers of Jesus to recognize that just because I may think to myself, there's no way God can use me because I do this or I say this or this is my circumstance, this is my financial situation, my living situation, my personal life situation. Those things may need addressing, but just because those things exist doesn't mean you can't be used. Moses was big on that. I have a speech impediment. You can't use me for public speaking. Yes, I can. Watch me do it. I'm not fit to be a leader. Like look at these terrible things I did. I'm not fit to be a leader. Yes, you are, and I'm going to show you why. I think that we let that monster take control too much, that it prevents God from being able to use us, and it shouldn't, and it doesn't. God's going to use the worst of the worst to do great and good things because we don't understand why. But I think that, Werewolf by Night gives a perfect example of somebody with a monster inside them, literally is able to use it to do good.
Yeah.
And I think that it would serve, even people who are new in their faith, even people that may not believe the same way that you and I do about who Jesus is and what he can do. I think it's important to recognize that who you are and your circumstances don't define everything about you. They're a part of you, but they don't define what you're capable of doing and being.
Totally.
And I think that we need constant reminders of that.
Yeah. No, it's a great thought, man. I love it. You want to rate this immaculate piece of art?
I'm ready. I'm ready to rate it. Now I'm gonna go first here because I feel like mine is gonna be better than yours. I feel like my rating is gonna be higher than yours. For me, this was perfect. I loved every minute of it. Again, my notes on it have nothing to do with the art itself. It has to do with the source material choices, production choices. The acting was great, the writing was great, the length was great, the directing, the music, the cinematography, everything. This is Conroy all day. This is, I have no notes in regards to the movie. I think it
All
was
right.
perfect as is. I loved every minute. Kevin Conroy all day, baby.
Well, you'll be surprised with mine. I thought it was great execution. I think the acting is excellent. It's a great step into the supernatural realm of the MCU. It was fun, but it was dark. It exists unto itself. It could go somewhere. It probably won't, but it doesn't even have to. It pays respect to the Universal Monsterverse without being campy. It stands alone on its own ground. It's a great addition into the MCU. I also give it a Kevin Conroy.
Yay! Oh, that's so nice. I'm
The
so glad
stars
to hear that.
align.
That's a beautiful thing. I love when we can rate things at the same rating. That
That
and
almost never happens.
never and I don't know how often we would throw a Conroy around. We have it there,
We don't,
but
but we
I wouldn't
highly recommend this one.
highly recommend. And that was something that I forgot to put in my notes that we didn't talk about. Just very quickly, you don't need to watch anything else to watch this.
Exactly.
You don't need
Thanks,
any
Marvel.
Avengers. You don't need Guardians. You don't need the other Marvel TV shows. You don't
Nothing.
need any. You don't even need a history in the books to just watch this and enjoy it for what it is. If this is the only comic book property you've ever seen, you will be totally fine. You don't need anything else.
You'll be incredibly satisfied. We highly recommend it. So go watch Werewolf by Night if you haven't already, and give us your thoughts. What did you think about the movie? If you've seen it, leave us a comment on this video in YouTube. You can find us on Facebook. You can also find us on Instagram. We're under the Sanctum Pod, pretty much anywhere you can find podcasts and video. And thank you so much for everybody who subscribed, left some kind messages, liked some posts. Guys, we cannot do this without you, so we appreciate it. And thank you so much for listening to this episode.
Yes, thank you very much. And to close us out, remember, sometimes monsters are just guys named Jack and Ted. So be kind.
So be kind.
Listen, it's a positive way to end. Sometimes kindness is
it's
all
a
that
monster
matters.
movie.
Which is why we need kindness. Monsters, listen, it's like Wreck-It Ralph says, I'm a bad guy and that's okay.
You watched Wreck-It Ralph?
Wreck-It Ralph is a phenomenal piece of cinema, and I will hear nothing to the contrary.
I will hear none of it.
Vanellope Von Sweet does not get enough credit for being an actual Disney princess.
Now you're just making up words. I have no idea what you're talking about.
They know. You know. Out there. You know.